Hey everybody, this is Cameron. I'm going to tell you the secret behind the secret. First, let me start with a quote from someone everybody seems to respect for some reason, Albert Einstein. Actually, I don't know the exact quote, but he said something to the effect of, a genius is somebody who can make something complex seem simple. Yeah, maybe. But how do you make a turbine jet engine simple? It's not simple. It's complex. You could maybe reduce some of the principles of how a turbine engine works into simple terms. But that's like saying make a skyscraper complex, or make a skyscraper simple. Make a, take anything complex. Take a Patek Philippe watch. Look at the back of a Patek Philippe watch. Would you look at that and be like, wow, that's very complex, that's not genius? No. Now, is there a certain type of genius that can take complex things and make them simple? Yes, but that's only one form of intelligence. And it's actually a very limited form of intelligence because the whole purpose of it is to translate your complexity into simplicity for other people who are not able to process the complexity. So basically, Albert Einstein was just saying, all of you are so stupid, and the reason why you think I'm a genius is because I'm able to take something that seems complex, which I actually don't know anything about, and make it simple. Put it into simple terms that you can understand. And yet, who actually understands the theory of relativity? Think about it. The guy who's telling you that a genius is somebody who can make complex things simple can't even explain the theory of relativity to you in a way that makes sense. So, is he a genius or not? So what's the secret behind the secret? What does that have to do with the secret behind the secret? Most of you probably know about Napoleon Hill. He wrote Think and Grow Rich. He also wrote a book that not a lot of people have read called Law of Success in 16 Lessons. And I'm just going to give you a quick recap of the Napoleon Hill story for those who don't know who that is. Basically, the richest man in the world at the time, in around the 1920s, was Andrew Carnegie, who you've probably heard of. He's associated with U.S. Steel and some other things. One of the richest men in the world, and he was friends with, like, Henry Ford and Firestone and all these guys. I think Thomas Edison, if I'm not mistaken. Point is, according to the story, he commissioned Napoleon Hill to travel around and meet with all of his rich buddies and world leaders and elites and figure out and study them and figure out what were the keys to success. Because I suppose Andrew Carnegie didn't really understand what the keys to success were. He was applying them perhaps unconsciously and wasn't really certain about what it was that gave him the ability. And I can relate to that. Like, there's certain abilities that you might have where you're like, I don't really understand how I have this ability. It's not even something I developed. I just seems like I was born with it. So he wanted to understand what was the keys to success. I suppose, according to the story, that Andrew Carnegie was interested in helping people and bringing up the common man or something like that. Well, anyways, he commissioned Napoleon Hill, and Napoleon Hill traveled around and spoke to all these people and studied them, and then started collecting the information that he was finding and presenting it in seminars and consulting and basically teaching other people how to be successful. And there was, according to Kevin Trudeau, a story where Napoleon Hill was on a recording at a Chamber of Commerce, and it was recorded back in the day. And Kevin says that he listened to this recording, although I don't think it's been released, where basically Napoleon Hill was sharing his findings with the Chamber of Commerce, and at the time it was like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where it was like all the top leaders in the industries. And basically sharing with them, like, I've discovered the secret to success. It's your thinking. It's the way you think. And you can actually change your thinking. And if you change your thinking, you can become more successful. And so, according to the story, the people that Napoleon Hill was speaking to were kind of like upset by him explaining this, because it was like, wow, that's going to create a lot more competition for us. I really don't want people to get out. And apparently his books were censored and kind of filtered, and so Think and Grow Rich apparently doesn't contain everything you need to know. But the point is that when Napoleon Hill shared this secret with the successful people and they got upset with it, and I guess expressed their displeasure to him, he said, look, you don't have anything to worry about because everybody I share this secret with, very few people actually apply it. Very few people are actually able to take it on and do anything with it. So there's really nothing that you need to fear. Although Napoleon Hill, I think, was very interested in sharing this information with people. Well, fast forward, that was 1920, so that's almost 100 years later now. So fast forward to today, and as you can see, there's very few people who are very successful in this world, and mostly a lot of people who are in poverty, and a few people who think they're doing well, but are just living a middle class or upper middle class life, who really don't even know what real luxury is. And so we still have a world that's no different than the 1920s. The only difference is that there's more technology, and one big fundamental difference is that there's more communications technology, so I could be speaking to you live on a Sunday morning explaining these things, whereas if you look at Napoleon Hill back then in the 20s, he was doing it in secret, and there was barely any effective recording technology back then. So now I can just speak my mind, and people can watch it, and you can share it. So Napoleon Hill discovered these secrets that you change your thinking, you can change your life. You can change your thoughts towards ones that make you money, then you'll make money. Yeah, it seems kind of obvious, actually. But what I want to share with you is that the secret behind the secret is actually much more fundamental and something you can actually do something with. Anyone can do something with this. Not anyone can do something with the concept that you change your thinking, you change your life, because you don't even know where you're thinking. Let me ask you a question. Where do your thoughts come from? You don't know. And I talk to people all the time and ask them this question. People who you would consider successful. People who present themselves as knowing how to make other people successful. And I ask them, where do your thoughts come from? And they say they don't know. They're like, everybody says either I don't know, you got me there, or two, I never really thought about that before. So let me get this straight. You're saying that the secret to changing your life is changing your thinking, but you don't know where your thinking comes from. That'd be like saying the secret to a good lasagna is the right tomato sauce. Oh, really? So where do you get the tomato sauce from? I don't know. It just arrives at my doorstep magically. It's like, okay, that's not really going to help anybody else, because unless you were born into an environment where you basically were exposed to and downloaded an effective thinking process from those around you and in your environment, you're not going to be able to do it on your own. Because here's why. Think about it. So let's say we accept the premise that if you change your thinking, you change your life. All right, so Napoleon Hill was right. But you don't know where your thoughts come from. How are you going to change your thinking? So where do your thoughts come from? Let me tell you about another guy that you probably have never heard of. All right, so very few people have heard of Napoleon Hill. Some of you have. If you're in Gin, you've definitely heard of him. If you're in Gin and you haven't heard of Napoleon Hill, I don't know what to tell you, man. You need to go back to the basics. But you're in Gin, let's say you've heard of Napoleon Hill, or you've been in success things and you've heard of Napoleon Hill, you've heard of Law of Success, you've heard of Think and Go Rich. But you're still struggling because you can't change your thoughts. You think you can, you change them for a little while, but something comes along and sidesweeps you, and suddenly you're back thinking the way you were before. And if you're really honest with yourself and you look deep within yourself and you admit to yourself, you know that you're the same person you were 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 years ago. You're no different. You haven't changed your thinking. All you've done is change the outward appearance so that other people think you're thinking you differently. That's really easy to do. That's called acting. It's like when you ever seen like these interviews with celebrities, with like Brad Pitt or whoever, where it's like you watch these interviews with them where they're just sitting down being themselves and they seem like total idiots. You're like, what is, they almost seem like there's something wrong with them a lot of times. It's like, what is wrong with these people? They don't seem very intelligent. Because when you see them on the screen, they're just acting. And if you know how filming works and how production works, you can make somebody look really good. So acting is a skill. You can learn to present yourself a certain way. And that's what a lot of these positive thinkers do, is they present themselves as happy and knowing things, but they don't. They haven't really changed internally. That's why their lives keep falling apart. So, how do you change your thinking? Well, let me tell you this little story about this guy named Johnson O'Connor. Back in the 20s, around the same time as Napoleon Hill, around the same time as the discovery of the light bulb, around the same time as the automation of manufacturing of cars. Yeah, I agree with that statement, Eros. Around the same time as all these discoveries were being made, General Electric, okay, who you may have heard of, if you don't know who General Electric is, General Electric, go look at any piece of electronics. They probably own it. GE. If you remember, if you're like my age, in your 30s or older, you probably remember, I don't know if they still do this because I don't watch TV, but on NBC, they used to have this little sound they would play. It would be like, dun, dun, dun. And they would play that before and after, like, everything. Dun, dun, dun. And if you go on a piano and you play those notes, what you'll find is that it's the notes GEC. GEC stands for General Electric Corporation. General Electric owns, or I don't know if they still do, but they owned NBC, MSNBC. GE also manufactures weapon systems for the government. They have their hands in a lot of different stuff. They're an energy company, and they're an electronics company, and a technology company. They manufacture lots of stuff. Well, guess who started General Electric? General Electric was the merger between two companies. One was, I don't remember the name of it because it's something you probably don't even know of. It's like Midwestern Electric or something like that. And it was a merger between one gigantic company and another company called Edison Electric. So General Electric is the brainchild, so to speak, of Thomas Edison. It's the continuation of Thomas Edison's company. It's one of the biggest companies on the planet, and if you go look it up, I think there's only like 5 companies that are bigger than GE, and they're all like Chinese industrial manufacturing companies. So General Electric back in the 20s was having this issue because, as you can imagine, technologies were starting to be invented, and it was kind of blowing people's minds. Like, imagine you live in like the freaking 1800s, early 1900s, and there's no electricity. There's just like candles and gas lamps and shit. And so it's like kind of a pain in the ass at night because you can't really light, you don't really have any light. You got to like go through this little hoop-de-hoop to get light. And so here comes Thomas Edison, invents the electric light bulb, and then does this whole scheme to like get everybody electrical wiring in their houses, and suddenly it's like, damn, it's like somebody comes on and watch this. They flip this switch, and suddenly the whole room is illuminated. And they're like, whoa, how long does it last? They're like, as long as you want. And they're like, what the? So imagine going back to the 1800s and showing someone an iPad. Imagine going back to the 1800s and showing them an iPhone. That's probably how people felt when electricity was invented. Just like when a new technology comes out, we're kind of like, whoa, this is cool. Like when the iPod came out, we're like, whoa. Now, we tend to not always have that exact reaction because things kind of come in stages. But back then, electricity was a pretty big leap from, gas-powered lamps and stuff like that, and candles. But not only just electric lights in your house, think about what else they did. Now they could start creating electronic circuits. Do you know the first computer program was actually written as a mathematical paper before there was even such a thing as an electronic circuit? So they actually wrote a computer program, but it was like a mathematical paper, and then it was like, well, if there was some kind of device that could process information, then we could put this into it and it would perform this result. And then so that led to, the first computer science departments were actually just extensions of the mathematics departments. So what happened when they invented electricity, not when they invented electricity, but when they invented the light bulb and they started creating electric circuits and electronics, it was like a total revolution. That's what's made even this conversation right here possible. But you can imagine General Electric at the time, things were starting to change so rapidly that they really were having a problem because there was so much employee turnover because it was like people just couldn't adapt. I mean, it's like, imagine if you have a bunch of like people, like imagine you have like a company with a bunch of 50-year-olds and then you walk in there and you're like, all right, tomorrow all of you are going to start using Snapchat. They'd be like, what? Snapchat? What? Like, you know, like kids know this. Like when you try to explain stuff to your parents that's like new technology or new apps and stuff, it's just like they don't process it. That's why all the old people are on Facebook. That's why I'm on Facebook, because I like talking to all the old people, right? I love you guys. All right, so General Electric had all this employee turnover, and they had a problem. So they hired this guy named Johnson O'Connor. Johnson O'Connor went to Harvard. He was a researcher, I believe, for the military. And his forte was psychometrics, which is like, if you join the military today, like I was in the military, and like as part of my application process to the Air Force Academy, I had to like take all these tests. And some of it was more like intelligence stuff, but some of it was just fill out this questionnaire and we'll determine like what's a good role for you. So it's kind of a formality when you're applying to the Air Force Academy, but generally in the military, if you're like a new recruit, they are looking to see, you know, like basically here's what it is. You fill out this questionnaire with all these questions, and we're going to basically assess you, and we'll know what's the exact right position that'll make you the happiest and you'll be the most effective in. And that'll actually increase our effectiveness as a military. And companies use things like this. It's called psychometrics. So this guy, Johnson O'Connor, was like I want to say he's like kind of like the father of it. He was like one of the pioneers. He was like somebody who was really, really good at it. And instead of being in the universities and all that, GE brought him into the fold and gave him like a whole bunch of money, and he started something called the Human Engineering Laboratories. And they have laboratories all over the country. And they still have ones today, but now it's under the Johnson O'Connor Foundation, and it's no longer a part of GE. So that was like, I think in the 70s when he died, basically. They started a foundation to continue some of the research. And I actually have access to all the research. I know the head of the research department at the Johnson O'Connor Foundation. I corresponded with him many times. I have all of the research. I've read all of the research when it comes to what I'm about to tell you about. And basically, this is what happened. Johnson O'Connor started doing all this testing, and at his laboratories, he would have people come in and take all these series of tests. And what they were doing was testing every single human aptitude they could find, like even stuff like your dexterity with using tweezers. You know, your ability to every human aptitude. Plus, they would ask you all kinds of questions about your life. And so they would basically measure every single possible thing they could think of that they could measure in terms of a human being. And that way they were trying to figure out, well, here's the why they were doing it. General Electric said, Johnson O'Connor, please help us find the key to making our employees adaptable. Help us find the answer. Because they didn't want to just keep firing people and hiring people every time a new technology came out, or they needed to have more innovative people. People could adapt and think about this new technology and create something new with it. So that's why he started doing all this, and they obviously invested a lot. And in my opinion, this is one of the reasons why General Electric is one of the biggest companies on the planet, has become so powerful, because they actually figured out the key. It wasn't just change your thinking, change your life. It was like, hey, how do you actually change your thinking? Because adaptability is changing your thinking. Being able to learn new things equals changing your thinking. Consider what I'm saying. If you know some new knowledge, okay, like I tell you how to do something, but you can't apply it, you haven't changed your thinking. You haven't changed the neural pathways. You haven't changed the habits. You haven't changed the physical information that's stored inside of you, which is unconsciously causing you to do things. That's what it means to change your thinking. It doesn't mean to change your thoughts going on in your head only. That is your conscious mind. That's not really where your thinking is coming from. That's actually an after effect. If you go and look at the research, they studied when people have a thought versus when they experience the thought, when they become aware of it. Like, when is the thought generated electrically in the brain versus when is the person aware of it? And what they found is it's generated first and then the person's aware of it. So you can't change your thinking through thinking. You can be exposed to new information, but in itself isn't going to change your thinking. And people can use this repetition, spaced repetition process, but it's actually an inferior process compared to what I know about. Because spaced repetition, when you study the neuroscience of it, it's just like, it's kind of like knocking on the door at someone's house until they open it. But the thing is, they're upstairs with their headphones on. That's like your neural pathways. They're upstairs with their headphones on. You're just knocking. You keep knocking. You keep knocking. You keep knocking. You hope just one moment there's like some silence in their headphones and they're like, oh, what was that? and then they come. Because when you understand how neuroscience works, you understand how the neurons and the synapses work and the receptor cells work and how the changes in polarity of the cell work and how if you get the right amount of stimulus into the neuron, that it actually puts more receptor sites on the cell, which means information flows more easily. And you can actually do it in a way where it permanently creates more receptor cells. That's called long-term potentiation. But are you going to go study all the neuroscience like I have? I kind of doubt it. So just follow me for a second. Spaced repetition is an inferior form of learning. You didn't really have to use spaced repetition when you learn as a child. Now, you might think, oh, but I've seen my children, they have to repeat it. In the beginning, yes. In the very, very beginning, when a child doesn't have any even like letters or alphabet integrated, they have to go through a concrete stage where they're integrating those letters physically. But once that's there, they start downloading information automatically because they start seeing and perceiving more. And so, for example, when a parent acts a certain way, the child is automatically processing that, but they don't understand the context. And I've explained this in other videos. But the point is it's happening automatically, very quickly. That's why it's so easy for a child to learn a new language. But if you are an adult and you try to use spaced repetition to learn a new language, it doesn't really work. What's the best way to learn a new language? Is to go put yourself into that country. Well, it's the best way outside of the methods I'm talking about, which I haven't explained yet. But what I'm saying is, in terms of what you know, what's way better than spaced repetition is go immerse yourself in that country, because what happens is you get like sort of now if you go on vacation, it won't happen. But if you go immerse yourself, like live there, and you're kind of like, I have to speak the language now, what'll happen is you put yourself into a survival state where you're like reverting back in a certain sense to that natural ability where it's like, I have to survive, which is exactly what you were doing as a child. You had to survive. In that environment, you had to download information to survive, because if you didn't behave the way you were expected, there would be consequences. So, as a child, you have this natural ability. As an adult, you lose access to that. And then we're taught and trained through school to use this repetitive repetition process, which is quite inferior and is frustrating. And unless you just have retained your natural ability to learn, then learning is very difficult. So unless you have some sort of a genetic advantage where you're just able to learn more easily, then you're kind of screwed. And that's why it's difficult for you to change. Because even though you want something really bad, you really won't change. So how does Johnson O'Connor fit into this? Johnson O'Connor fits into this because what he realized when he did all those studies, and he studied everybody. He studied CEOs, presidents of companies. He studied nurses, nursing students, graduate students, doctors, mechanics, lawyers, teachers, psychologists, students, everybody, all different walks of life. They did this over like a 70-year period. But it was very evident in like the first 5 or so years of the research what the answer was. They just kept doing more research to like try to invalidate what they found originally, which was that the one thing that everybody had in common, whether you were a nursing student who was successful in your nursing career. For example, what they did was they would study like a set of students who were in nursing school. And then they would study them after they graduated and went into their careers and how long they lasted in their careers and so forth. Or whether they even graduated or whether they even got jobs. And what they found was, and they did the same thing with people who were studying, like doing business degrees, or people who were studying to be managers at companies, or who wanted to be executives in companies. And what they would do is they would do all these tests, and one of the tests that they would administer was a vocabulary test. And what they found was, if you were in the top 10% of the people who took the vocabulary test, you would be the ones who graduated and were successful. And if you were in the bottom 10%, basically none of those people graduated or were successful. So what they found was there was a direct correlation between the person's percentile of vocabulary, meaning whether they were in the top levels of their vocabulary compared to their peers or not. So you could actually, you could go to a school, and what they would do is they would look at all the problem students of a school. And what they found was, regardless of what the issues were, the number one thing that children always had in common was that they had poor vocabularies. When they found people who dropped out of school, it was poor vocabularies. When they found people who got divorced, it was because their vocabularies were not the same level. They had incompatible vocabularies. When they studied presidents of companies who were successful, the people who were making the most money basically in this world, if you think about it, CEOs, regardless of whether they were attractive, came from good families, we finished college. Some of them were like, didn't go past age 15 of school. Didn't matter. They all had effective vocabularies. And that doesn't mean that you can just talk to a person and know their level of vocabulary, because sometimes these people speak down on purpose because they know it makes people feel comfortable, or they know they can relate to other people. And that's why they're so effective at what they do, because they know how to communicate with other people. What you don't realize is, like someone like Trump, for example, people say he's stupid. The guy went to Wharton Business School. He was the commander of cadets at a military school that he went to. This guy is sharp. He's got a genius level IQ. You don't become a billionaire by being stupid. And that's the thing, is people, they look at the personality and think that that somehow means he's stupid. What you don't realize is you can go to a university and talk to a professor who seems really intelligent, but look how much money they make. Look at how much impact they have in the world. Very little compared to someone like Trump. That's the one thing that all these CEOs in common, is that they have very effective vocabularies. And what do I mean by vocabulary? When you really start looking at it, your vocabulary is your internal programming. Your vocabulary is where your thoughts come from. Think of it like this. When you're a little child, you're in an environment, and like I said, you're automatically absorbing information. You go through that concrete stage when you're learning like the alphabet. But then at a certain point, you start downloading all these new words from people. You're just listening and observing, and you start using them. And what you're doing is you're creating inside of you this device, this system, this technology, well, you could call it a vocabulary. You're creating a system that responds to stimulus from the environment and reacts. And how does it react? It produces thoughts, it produces feelings, it produces emotions. So when you're a child, for example, let's say you're in an environment and you see something happen to one of your parents. Like the dad comes home and he's like frustrated from work, and the mom's like, "Why are you home late?" And the dad's like, "Why are you always nagging at me?" And so in that moment, as a child, you're observing that, and you, without realizing it, are making a decision about what that exchange means to you. And you are learning what a relationship is, and you're learning what marriage is, and you're learning what speaking to another person is. You're learning about what respect is. You're learning about what work is, because your dad's coming home from work. You're learning about what being a house mom or housewife is. You're learning so many things in that moment, and you're storing that information as words based on the words that are being said. And then later on, when someone uses the word relationship and they show examples of moms and dads, you're like, "Oh yeah, okay, I know that word, relationships." And all those words and memories and everything get stored in that folder, like kind of like a folder on your desktop, if you will. And then what happens is later in life, when you're in a relationship, that folder marked relationship opens up and all that information starts coming out. And there's feelings and there's thoughts and emotions. And so when you're little, you're like building this like library, this computer system of all this information that's all connected. And so when you go out into the world and words are used and you're in relationships that are represented by words, then all of those folders start opening up and all that information, it's like little programs start running. Like you go into a relationship with someone and then suddenly the relationship program starts activating. And all the information that's in there that you've learned in your life starts running. It's like little programs running. And so what happens is you then create a life for yourself based on the vocabulary and the words that you have stored within you that was based on the environment that you grew up in and based on the experiences that you have. So if you grew up in an environment that for some reason put you in a situation where you had to survive and you developed certain skills of survival, of such as manipulation and such as like charisma, and you also had a genetic ability to learn new information that was kind of like above and beyond what most people would have, that's like someone like Andrew Carnegie or like Richard Branson. Now, someone like Bill Gates, for example, grew up in an environment where he grew up into a relatively elite family. So he was exposed to a lot of information, plus he had the genetic advantage of being able to learn new information. It's kind of like some people are born with an ability that would be like a defense shield. It's like they just retain that natural ability. It's mostly due to how their vocabulary was structured when they were little, but it's also due to who their parents were and whether their parents were very aware. Because if their parents were very aware and specific about how they interact with their child, that'll have a profound effect on the child, where the child will develop more self-awareness. If the parents are not very self-aware, the child will not develop much self-awareness. So the whole point is that Johnson O'Connor figured out that vocabulary was actually the foundation from which the thoughts are created. Because, yes, Napoleon Hill was right. If you change your thinking, you change your thoughts. Meaning the most successful people think differently than everybody else. But why do they think differently? That's what Johnson O'Connor figured out. Because they have a more effective vocabulary. Now, problem is, until now, nothing has been done with that information, really. In fact, the school systems already know about it. But look at the school systems. They don't really emphasize vocabulary very much. Children learn a few words here and there when they're in 1st through 3rd grade. But after that, it's pretty much, they just expect you to know how to read effectively and how to process information. And the studies show that the more you read at home, the more effective you'll be at school, like before you go to school. So pretty much the school systems are not actually teaching children anything. They're just filtering out the ones who already have an effective environment at home and rewarding them for that. And so they're putting those children into the elite positions like doctors and lawyers and so forth. And the children who don't have effective parenting and effective environments at home basically get screwed and get the shitty jobs. So school is not a actual education environment. It's more of a filtering environment. It's more of a way of identifying who will memorize and learn the information that we want them to learn that will hold the system in place, such as doctors and lawyers, etc., and who will probably not be able to do that and therefore will be the workers. It's just like Brave New World, where they have like alphas, betas, gammas, etc. It's the same kind of thing. And so the real point I want you to consider is that if you're trying to change your thinking, but you don't know how to change but you're not changing your vocabulary, now it's not as simple as just use new words. Because if you don't have access to how to actually reform your neural pathways, like you did when you were a child, you're kind of screwed. Because you can't actually go back and reform that programming inside. All you can do is do things that temporarily, you can speak different words, but speaking a new word is not the same thing as living it. When you build your vocabulary effectively, it will have an immediate result in your environment. As soon as you go into a new environment, you will see the effect of it. Immediately. So unless you know how to do that, you're kind of in a situation where you're just fooling yourself by telling yourself, oh, I'm improving, but the results are not evident. And what will happen is a lot of people just won't be aware of what their full potential is at the moment based on their base level of programming. So you'll have someone come along and encourage them. And then what they'll do is they'll start acting according to what they're really programmed as because they'll change their environment. So when they change their environment, suddenly they're into an environment that they're actually capable of dealing with. It'll seem like the result is different, but it's actually just a different environment. The question is, how can you go into an environment you actually feel uncomfortable with, but prepare yourself in advance so that when you go there, you're a new person and you can actually integrate into that environment effectively. And that's what being able to effectively integrate new vocabulary will do for you. And that's what we do with Techno Tutor. We actually change the vocabulary for real. Not just up here where your thoughts change and you're just telling yourself new ideas, but you change it at the level of where it really counts, which is the unconscious competence. Because when you do that, then when you go into your environment, the environment around you actually starts changing. People interact with you differently. People will ask you questions like if you build in the vocabulary of a lawyer, even if you don't go to law school, people will start coming up to you and they'll be like, are you a lawyer? Oh, you just seem like a lawyer. This is really how it works. I'm serious. I know people who've done this. People will treat you differently. That's why, for example, when a very wealthy person comes into a room, you can feel their presence because they have a different vocabulary and you can feel it. Now I'm going to introduce a new vocabulary word to you today, and I'll talk about it again later. I've talked about it a few times recently, and that's the word resonance. Resonance is the word for where your actual vocabulary is stored. Resonance is not vibration. We talked about that in an interview with Gavin the other day. Your resonance is like your physical programming. It's like the hard drive on your computer. When your computer turns off, the hard drive is still there, isn't it? Isn't the information still on the computer, but electricity is not flowing through it? When you turn the electricity on, now the computer is vibrating, and now it's producing a result on the screen. It's like a tuning fork. If you have a tuning fork and you pluck it, it makes a sound. It vibrates. But when it stops vibrating, the vibration is gone, but the tuning fork is still there. You pluck it again, it'll make the same vibration. Why is that? Because the tuning fork has a certain resonance. It's a certain physical structure which causes it to vibrate at that rate. You have a resonance. We already know this. You have a vibration, but you don't actually have a vibration. You just vibrate, and that causes a vibration. You have a resonance. You have a physical structure inside of you. That resonance, that is your vocabulary. Because we know words have certain frequencies. Words have a resonance. Words have a physical structure. When you study the neuroscience, when you look at a word, certain neurons in your brain activate. So each word, each letter, each shape actually has a physical representation in your brain that activates. So you can look at a brain of firing and say, that's the letter L, that's the word cat. It actually changes the architecture of your brain when you learn new words. But if you don't know how to really learn and get to the unconscious competence with a word, you're not really changing the neural pathways. You're just memorizing things for a short period of time. And you have to really put a lot of energy and focus into that. And the moment that something comes along in your life that distracts you, like there's a death in the family, or someone yells at you, or a client yells at you, or whatever, or someone says certain words, I guarantee you I could talk to you, any of you positive thinkers, I could find words that would trigger you and upset your positive state, because that's how it works. I just have to find the right words that would trigger you, because you don't have a completely effective vocabulary. When you have an effective vocabulary, you don't have to be positive, because you're always in a state with your resonance that's vibrating how you've programmed yourself. You don't have to try to be positive. You can still develop a positive personality, but when you actually know how to affect your resonance, it's a lot easier. You could just download unconsciously, competently, the right words of how to have a positive personality, and you'll do it automatically. You won't even have to think about it. Because if you're thinking about it, what does that mean? You're not at unconscious competence. If you're thinking about it, if you're afraid of your thoughts changing, or you're afraid of someone else saying certain things, that means you're not at unconscious competence, because unconscious competence means you can't change it. It means it's already there. So, for example, if you think about it, does the tuning fork worry? Like, okay, think about that. If you're nervous about performing, what does that mean? It's not in your resonance. If you're nervous about some result, about getting what you want, if you're not certain, 100% certain, it's because your resonance, you don't have that programmed into you physically, unconsciously, competently. Does a tuning fork worry about when it's plucked, whether it'll vibrate the right vibration, the right frequency? No, because it can't do anything other than that. So for those of you who are struggling in life, and when I say struggling, I mean, be honest with yourself. You don't have what you want. You're not really on the right path. You have faith and hope, but you don't know for sure. It's because you haven't changed your resonance. And if you change that physical structure, the results will change automatically. I'm not saying it won't take time to get the result. That just depends on how big your goal is. But you could spend your whole life convincing yourself that you're on the right track and get to the end of your life and never get it. And that's pretty sad. That's what Techno Tutor does. It changes the words within at the unconscious competence level. This is like next level shit. And there's very few people who realize this yet. But to all you life coaches out there, I have a message for you. You might as well jump on board, because all your clients and all those coaches, they will work for Techno Tutor, and they will work with it, and they will inevitably use it, because it is the solution. So you might as well jump on board. You might as well check it out. And here's the thing, for all the life coaches. We're not competing. You guys have the tools of how to support a person, how to coach a person, so that they can learn what's the ways to get what they want. But you don't have the tools of how to actually change that physical programming at the resonance level like I'm talking about. And that's something I can support you with. I can help you become a better life coach. A life coach that their clients get instant results, right? Of course, you're going to have to manage expectations. You can't just say, I am a billionaire and then suddenly have $1 billion. That's not how it works. How long did it take Bill Gates to become a billionaire? And that was a guy who was born into the right environment with the right genetics and everything. It still takes time. But do you want to be certain that you're on the right path, or do you want to just believe you're on the right path? Because if you look at the word believe, right in the middle is L-I-E, lie. So if you believe it, you got to be honest with yourself. You're lying to yourself, right? So send me a message. Let me show you what I can do. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised, because even as a life coach, you know that you can actually improve yourself. And if you improve yourself, your clients will get better results. Trust me, and it happens very fast. So let me know. All right, I hope that you've got some good information out of this. I say I hope, because I don't really know if you can hear me. I don't know if you have the vocabulary to really process what I'm saying, because I'm telling you the real fucking answer here. I'm telling you the real solution. Like the real deal. No more bullshitting. No more playing around. No more pretending. The real deal. And if we work together, we can get this world to a place of, I don't even know if we can imagine how amazing this world could be, really. We can't, because our imaginations are limited by our programming, which is designed by this world, so we can only really see what we can only really believe what we can see at this point. So let's not worry about that. Let's just become as effective as we can possibly be, and when we get there, we'll see further. All right, everybody, have a good Sunday, and I will talk to you next time.